welcome back. Today we're talking about Insecure Season 5, Episode 6, Tired Okay. And at this point I've accepted that the finale will be, it is what it is. But I'm not gonna lie, I was entertained this episode. I laughed. The Condola sort of fantasies it sent me. I literally laughed out loud. And it's very clear that Issa is in this kind of self-sabotaging mood, and she's not okay. So the episode starts off with this fantasy of Condola and Lawrence. And at first I didn't know what to make of this. Everything seemed sweet and okay, and she's holding the baby and she's like, it's so cute and it's so wholesome, and then she just drop kicks Condola and throws the baby. And from this fantasy we can tell that, she's not over Lawrence and she's not over the situation, right? Like, she kind of looks at Condola like, this is my life. And Issa is in this mindset, this kind of scarcity mindset, where she really wants to be successful somehow. And so she just kind of looks at everyone around her as doing so much better than they actually are, right? And, shortly thereafter, she starts Instagram stalking him, and she notices that Lawrence is back in Los Angeles. And so throughout this episode, she's trying to block out this information. Okay, so we'll start with Issa. So Issa is she's doing well, but she's also not doing well. So in terms of her relationship with Molly, it seems to be going fine. She's really taking care of her family. She's bringing them food. And I feel like where this season failed is not really allowing us to see how Molly and Issa kind of repaired their friendship, because again, it kind of skipped a year. And I think this show has always been about friendship. And now they're kind of focusing on each character by themselves and their love life. And it's a bit like, I think this season would have been great if there were more seasons. But there's just too many storylines, and I just don't see how they can kind of, end it coherently. But I guess Molly and Issa are fine. There's no tension between them. There's nothing. And again, I feel like this was a missed opportunity. And so in that regard, they're cool. In terms of work, Issa seems to be doing fine. She has new sponsors. They're advertised in magazines. So she's doing well. And she's kind of on her way to book new clients, and she's really pitching herself, right? She's like, listen, we really want to help you guys. We want you guys. And as soon as she mentions the name, will block. The clients that she was pitching to suddenly get very nervous and they back out, so her kind of attempt is derailed. And the reason they back out is because of this Crenshaw issue. And this whole situation with Crenshaw has been bubbling in the background. So the last block party she threw, although it was really successful, behind the scenes it was a disaster. And she's been kind of garnering a really bad reputation as this person who kind of says one thing but does something else. So to try and kind of rectify the issue, she quickly goes over to Crenshaw with some brownies, and she's like, listen, she has to nip this in the bud. This whole conversation she has with him, I think, speaks to intention and impact. Although you don't mean badly, although you don't mean to cause any harm, you have to acknowledge sort of the impact of your words. And I think Issa just kind of fails to do that. So yes, although she meant well, she really was worried about, these sponsors and the impact it would have on her and also on him. It was coming from a good place. The impact it had is that it really compromised this man's integrity and put him in a very compromising position. And he kind of calls her out. He said, listen, you need to acknowledge that you were more concerned with securing your bag than kind of, keeping your integrity. And that's true, right? Issa has had this chip on her shoulder since the season started. She doesn't want to go back to being a Lyft driver. She's kind of in this place where she keeps comparing herself to other people. And so, she just got sponsors, and her priority is to keep this going. And he's just like, you just need to acknowledge this and we can move on. And she was so defensive, right? She's like, I was trying to do you a favor, I was trying to help us both out. And again, her attention was good, but her impact was not. And she just kind of refused to kind of see it from his perspective. And for that, he was done. He's like, girl, you inspired my new line, integrity. I laughed, because she did deserve that fully. And she took her brownies, the whole thing about the brownies, you could have just left the brownies there. You didn't have to take it. And so she just refused to really acknowledge, sort of how messed up what she did was. So she takes her brownies and she goes. The one thing that he says to her that kind of echoes in her mind is that you need to own the choices you made. Essentially, you made your bed and you need to lie in it. And she just takes on this victim mentality, right? And I love the first fantasy with Condola where she's super like, you know, she's pissed off. She's just like in this like seeking revenge. And the next fantasy she has about Condola is the opposite, right? Like it's this kind of victimhood mentality. So she's standing in line, she's getting food, and then all of a sudden she sees Condola. And this Condola fantasy was so perfect, right? It kind of speaks to this imposter syndrome that I think Issa is going through. So she sees Condola, she has a ring on her finger, she's kind of like thanking her for the choices she made, right? Like bragging about this giant ring on her finger instead of this small ring that he bought her. I guess Lawrence makes $1 billion a day, like these kind of extremes, right? And so her fantasy of Condola is someone who's doing super well, who deserves it, right? Like she's the quality woman that she cannot really be. And it's funny how like our thoughts can become like tsunamis and our fantasies can really work against us, right? Like she's kind of in this state where she's so like, she's kind of built up Condola and her life as being so perfect in contrast to her own, right? And the sort of, the way that manifests itself is in self-sabotage, right? These thoughts kind of escalate to a point where she's kind of unable to really stop it. And I think at one point Condola drop kicks her and she's just lying there, right? Like powerless, like she feels useless. She feels like just dead. And these sort of thoughts, they get so out of control that it kind of leaks into her relationship with Nathan. And the thing with Nathan and Issa is like, even from the start, I don't feel that this is natural at all. Like Nathan is very attractive, but he's kind of attractive in that sort of like, you like him, but there's no chemistry. I don't know how to describe it. Like he's like, there's certain guys you can acknowledge, oh, you're very cute or you're very handsome. But then there isn't that kind of pull. And that's how I see Issa. Like there's no fire. And so she keeps throughout the episode trying to get him to say, I love you. And I don't think that he has to say, I love you. I think his actions speak louder than his words. And I think someone can say they love you, but you really have to pay attention to what someone is doing and not just what they're saying. And I think this whole I love you thing is just an excuse for her to kind of flake. And rather than admit that maybe she's not that into him, she keeps trying to pick fights with him. So, you know, she's pissed off and she didn't have a good day. And Nathan also did not have a good day, right? So Nathan was having trouble at the barbershop. He gets into sort of a confrontation with one of his coworkers because he basically decided to, you know, like help take on one of his clients because this guy was late. But his coworker called him bipolar and crazy. Like he really kind of went at him. And this kind of sent Nathan like spiraling a bit, like he's not comfortable. He comes home and he's kind of just being honest, right? Saying like, listen, I've had a long day. I'm not sure I even want to be in LA anymore, let alone this barbershop. There's too much drama. You know, this isn't good for me. And he was speaking openly and honestly, you know, like, and I find sometimes when people speak candidly, they make it about themselves. Like listening is an art that's easier said than done. And Issa, being in her crazy mindset, basically just starts making it about herself. She's like, oh, okay, so that's what it's about. Like, excuse me, ma'am, like this has nothing to do with you. And automatically she starts going in on him on the I love you situation. And I feel like throughout this conversation, like I really like that Nathan did not let her, you know, he didn't give her the response that she wanted. He didn't give her any acknowledgement. Because as far as he's concerned, he's been available emotionally. He's been available emotionally. He's been there. He's available. He listens to her. So he's not about to let her, like, you know, put words in her mouth. He's not about to let her put words in his mouth. And so I like that he kind of kept, you know, fighting back. And this whole question of I love you is just, it's kind of a Band-Aid, right? And he attacks her back. He's like, first of all, I'm talking about myself. You don't even, like, the fact that you made this about you is already problematic. Second of all, I've communicated clearly. You're the one who's all over the place. You're the one who's, you know, kind of scatterbrained a bit. And she really, like, she retreats, right? Like, she doesn't keep going. She kind of says, listen, let's just drop this. And I thought it was interesting that she didn't keep the conversation going because, you know, it's sometimes when you're in that self-sabotage mindset, you have this idea of yourself as being so, like, unlovable. and maybe she's wondering why Nathan is even with her, right? And I felt like she kept trying to get Nathan to say something, bad about her, or say something like that would kind of justify this victim mindset that she's in, but he didn't let her. He's like, you need to sort yourself out. Like, I'm sorted. You need to sort in terms of this I love you situation, why we didn't talk about it. What's there to talk about? 1 minute you're doing this, 1 minute you're doing that. And it's true, Issa's very inconsistent. And I think this whole I love you thing too is she's trying to like block out that memory of condolence. And she thinks if he says I love you, it might help with that. But it's petty. And she knows she's wrong. And so she gets her food and she sits next to him and they just kind of eat silently. And, it was super awkward. And again, the thing with Nathan is he's a good character. But because it's a final season, there's just not enough time to flesh out this relationship. So again, like there's a lot of good ideas this season, but I don't know how this will contribute to the end. So, with that, we'll touch on Molly. And Molly, again, she's almost like, the way they're trying to wrap up Molly's storyline, it's like they really want her to find somebody. So Molly ends up going to her retreat. Issa takes care of her family. And in this retreat, we find out a few things about her. Like first, she was able to finish her presentation. Second, apparently her coworkers did not like her very much when she first got hired. So they're kind of all drinking and they kind of mention how nitpicky she was, how kind of judgy she was. And she's sitting there, so she's come a long way. And I guess she kind of like drank herself under the table. And this whole like storyline, this whole tension between her and her boss, I thought like her boss is cute, I'm not gonna lie, but again, it felt like forced, like we have to give Molly a love interest. It made sense and it also didn't make sense, so Molly's kind of going through this whole thing with her family. She still hasn't told anybody at work about it. She gets to the presentation where thankfully, she barely got through it, and then she finally admits to her boss, this guy, like, hey, my mom is sick, and that's kind of where my mind was, right? So her family was texting her, and her family is really funny because they were texting her nonsense, and meanwhile she's very worried that her mom is sick. And they have this very interesting conversation about like work-life balance. And it is true, like if you die tomorrow, your workplace, they will replace you. It doesn't matter, like we're all just part of the machine. And he admitted that, he was also going through a very tough time, and, he managed to, like nobody at work knew. And this whole thing where you kind of leave your problems at the door and you come to work and you're a professional, like professionalism is just, it's propaganda, right? Like at the end of the day, we're human and work should revolve around our lives. Like our life shouldn't revolve around work. And I appreciated that conversation. And they did have some chemistry, you know what I mean? So there was something there. And towards the end of the episode, she kind of finds out that her mother is okay. And she's really excited. And, he comes to the door to give her a goodie bag, which I thought was random, but okay. And she gives him a big hug. She's about to kiss him, right? Like there's this cute little dialogue about like mugs and their many uses. And again, I think they had good chemistry, but it feels forced. And it does make sense for Molly to meet somebody at work because I think for some people, like you have to meet organically. Like if you meet somebody at work, it's a lot different because there's already that mutual respect between the two of you, and they've kind of seen you at your best and at your worst. So there is a good foundation already in terms of friendship and respect. And maybe this is why the dating scene hasn't been working for Molly that much, because when you're dating, you kind of just start from scratch. You kind of have to trust they're who they are and you're who you are. And especially if you have no mutual friends or sort of inner circle, like dating can be very difficult. So it's often best to meet people like within your circle. So in that sense, it made sense for Molly, but again, it felt forced, right? Like they really want to give her a happy ending and they want to give Issa a happy ending, but there's just not enough time to flesh out all these details. And so again, I was entertained this episode. I think there was a lot to unpack or kind of construct in terms of self-sabotage and how we kind of, let our minds wander and we don't really intervene, right? So Issa, time and time again, her mind is just like, before her fantasies were so like encouraging and they were so empowering, right? And this season, they're also negative and, she's looking at everybody else like the grass is greener, and it's really affecting her ability to maintain a healthy relationship. So I don't know how they're going to end the season. There's no time. So, at this point, I'm just kind of taking every episode as it is. But you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.